Have you ever laid awake at night wondering, am I missing my chance to optimize Roth conversions before RMDs kick in? Or maybe you've asked yourself, after a lifetime of saving, am I really going to feel okay spending my own nest egg? Or maybe you're looking across the dinner table at your younger spouse thinking, how in the heck are we going to plan for a 40 or even 50-year time horizon in retirement? Well, you're not alone. Today, we're going to tackle all three of these very common questions and concerns we hear from our clients and even listeners every single day. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the 98th edition of the Planning for Retirement podcast. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host, and I'm excited for this one today. It's going to be a great episode. If you missed it, if you have not been following the YouTube channel, you're missing out. Okay. You need to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Well, we just hit 1,000 subscribers in September, and we announced that we were going to do a giveaway. Well, we did the giveaway last Thursday. I went live on the channel and announced the winner and the runner-up. So congrats to both of those individuals for phenomenal responses to the two questions that we put out. Number one, what is your bucket list trip? A golf trip would be great. And both of those winners were golf trip comments. And then the second one is, what is one burning question that you have related to retirement planning that is keeping you up at night? And that second question led to so many great responses on the YouTube channel. Like I copied and pasted all of them into a Word document, and I've highlighted all of the ones that I'm like, I want to literally address this in a Q&A type session, a Q&A type podcast. So today we're going to do part one of that. So we're going to do two parts to this one just because there were so many great questions and I want to just tackle them as soon as possible. I don't want to delay. Typically, we've been doing the Q&A session every 5 or 6 episodes or so, but I do not want to wait because there are so many good ones, and I want to knock these out in today's episode and episode 99. So you're not going to want to miss those two. Of course, make sure to subscribe and follow along to the podcast. So without further ado, why don't we jump into question number one? Okay, here's question. I'm going to just read it verbatim. I'm not going to change any of the verbiage here. This subscriber on the YouTube channel said in this comment, he said, I have the majority, or she, I don't even know. He or she said, I have the majority of my retirement savings in pre-tax accounts. So I am worried about how to do the complex math to optimize Roth conversions before RMDs kick in. Such a great question and so common. And I mentioned this on the YouTube channel last Thursday, but this is one of those things where I feel like this is going to shift. Like the trend is going to shift in 15 years when we're having this conversation. I'm going to predict that the majority of folks are going to have the majority of their assets in Roth accounts versus pre-tax accounts. Right now, as it stands today, the folks that are retiring today and that have been retiring over the last 10 to 15 years, at least the people I've been talking to, have the majority, if not all, of their savings in pre-tax accounts. And when I say pre-tax, what I mean is you took a tax deduction for that contribution. So you contributed to your 401k, contributed to your 403b, contributed to your TSB, contributed to your traditional IRA or SEP IRA. And those contributions were you received a tax deduction up front. So in the year you made the contribution, you lowered your taxable income. That seems like a win on paper. And that's why retirement plans have been so popular for many, many decades. The rub is those assets, yes, they grow tax deferred. So every year you're not getting a 1099 from your brokerage institution, your financial institution saying, hey, you know what, you owe dividends or interest income or capital gains taxes, because all of those assets, all of those investments inside of that vehicle are growing tax deferred. When you go to pull the money out of these accounts, that's when they are taxable as ordinary income. Okay. And this is why people are so up in arms over the last, let's say 5 to 10 years about this, because they're like, oh, I thought, I was getting a tax break. I put these dollars in. You did get a tax break. You got a tax deduction up front. So in theory, you had more money in your pocket in that particular tax year to do whatever you wanted to it, whether it's pay down debt or save for college education or save more for retirement on an after-tax basis, or just have more money to pay the bills. But again, people have been up in arms because now they're taking distributions out of the retirement accounts and they're paying taxes on it. And sometimes these taxes can be significant. And these are the RMD tax trap. I've talked about this on the podcast and in the YouTube channel. I call it the tax trap of 401ks for a reason, is because I've noticed, at least over the last 10 to 15 years, talking to clients and prospective clients, that A lot of folks, they kind of get complacent when they retire. They don't do anything about these tax deferred accounts. Okay. So all of a sudden they enter this period of time where their tax bracket goes way down, but they're kind of just like, they're complacent. They're not really paying attention to what's going on in their retirement accounts and what those opportunities are down the road, and also those traps down the road. Well, the RMD tax trap is going to kick in either at 73 or 75. It depends it depends on your year of birth. If you were born before 1960, your RMD age, RMD stands for required minimum distribution, is age 73. If you were born in 1960 or later, your RMD age is 75. So if you're 65 or younger, your RMD age is 75. Okay. So you've got a little bit more of a window there to address this RMD tax trap. And so here's what the RMD tax trap is. Okay. For those of you that have not been paying attention to the podcast or following the YouTube channel, the RMD trap happens because you've been complacent for that period of time. Maybe it's several years, or maybe it's even a decade plus. And then all of a sudden you turn that magic age 73 or magic age 75. And all of a sudden you have to take out those required minimum distributions. The IRS says, hey, you know what? You've been doing a great job saving. Awesome work. But all of these accounts that have been growing tax deferred, pre-tax, okay? All of those accounts are going to be subject to required minimum distributions beginning this year. And if you don't take out at least that required minimum distribution, we are going to slap you with a 25% tax penalty on the money that should have come out. Now, it used to be 50%, so 25% is a bargain. But of course, nobody wants to pay unnecessary taxes. So ultimately what you do, and what our clients do in this situation, is they at least take out the RMD. Many of the folks we work with that are in retirement, sometimes they're taking out the RMD plus some. Okay, we call this the RMD plus method. But for some folks, maybe you've got a pension and Social Security, and combined, that's covering your basic necessities. You may not need all of the RMD. You may not need any of the RMD. We have clients that literally do not spend any of their RMDs, and they're taking out 6 figures of their retirement account, or close to 6 figures out of their retirement account, and they have to pay taxes on that. Even though they don't need that income, they have to take the money out because they don't want to pay the 25% penalty, and they have to pay taxes on those dollars. Okay. Now, obviously, this could be a problem, because what happens then, taking out those distributions, paying the taxes, that could push up your income tax bracket, maybe by 1 or 2 brackets. It could also push you into a higher taxation on your Social Security income. It could also trigger unnecessary IRMA surcharges. IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. It could trigger those surcharges, and now you're paying extra taxes on your Medicare. It could also trigger the net interest income taxes, where you're paying more tax on your interest income and dividends. All of these things are the reason I call this the tax trap of traditional 401ks, is because of those RMDs kicking in and folks not addressing them in that, what I like to call that Roth conversion window. Okay. We're going to talk about all that in just a second. But first, let me just address this math piece here. Okay. Because the listener, the YouTube subscriber, I mentioned complex math to optimize the Roth conversions. Okay. And I've seen this movie before. And listen, unless you are a spreadsheet wizard, okay, my suggestion here is, why not use some kind of financial planning software like Bolden? Bolden, or it used to be New Retirement. I've never used it personally, okay, because we pay for our own financial planning software. But I know many DIYers really like Bolden, and they have some Roth conversion modeling in there. And that's all great, okay? But we're going to come back to the math piece in just a second. But if you really just want like a starting place, what I would first do is map out what your lifetime tax brackets are going to look like over the course of your retirement, or maybe even starting today. If you're not yet retired, right? Maybe you're 60 and you plan to retire in a couple of years. Map it out beginning now. So beginning this year, what's your estimated income tax bracket? Okay. So your marginal tax bracket, not your effective rate. Your effective is essentially your average tax rate. I'm talking about your marginal tax bracket. Are you in the 10, the 12, the 22, 24, so on and so forth? Okay. What tax bracket are you in? What tax bracket are you expected to be in next year, the year after that, and so on and so forth? You can see why what I'm saying is financial planning software really helps with this, because it will help project out inflation raises on those tax brackets, because those are typically built in every single year. and ultimately different income that might change for you over time. Like, hey, when are you going to claim Social Security? Because some of that, or up to 85% of that, could be included in your taxable income. What about dividends and interest income, or capital gains, or those RMDs kicking in at 73, 75? So map out where your tax bracket is today, where you expect it to be over the course of your lifetime. All right. Then I want you to see if there are any gaps, okay, where your income tax brackets potentially drop. This is what we, in our firm, we like to call this the Roth conversion window. Generally speaking, for most people, this is post-retirement. You have no earned income anymore, or maybe very little earned income. Maybe you retired in February. So maybe you had a month or two of a little bit of income, or maybe you got one bonus, but you certainly didn't have the full year of income. Okay. And before Social Security kicks in, before RMDs kick in, required minimum distributions kick in, or better yet, before both of those income sources kick in. So you have no earned income, no Social Security, no RMDs. Generally speaking, we see a drop in that marginal tax rate. Okay. Now, at this window, this Roth conversion window, sometimes could last a few years. Sometimes it could last a decade. Sometimes it could last 15 to 20 years, depending on how early you retire. Imagine someone retiring at 55. They have a potentially a 20 year Roth conversion window where they are not required to take out any minimum distributions for the next 20 years. They can do some damage with those Roth conversions if it makes sense in their plan. And I say that because it's not all the time. Just because you're in the Roth conversion window doesn't mean you should aggressively convert your retirement accounts to Roth. I'm telling you that right now. This is not mainstream advice. The mainstream media, the mainstream podcasts, everyone pushing Roth conversions. And I'm seeing this trickle in to you all, even PFR Nation, even you listeners are kind of brainwashed, not you specifically, but just in general, people are being brainwashed into thinking Roth conversions are the answer to all of your problems. I'm telling you, this is a lie. Okay. Do not believe this lie. It always depends. In financial planning and personal finance, the answer is it always depends. Is never black and white. There's always the gray. And that's why I love what I do, is because I can marry or coordinate the quantitative with the qualitative. Okay. So sometimes even from a quantitative, maybe that does make some sense, but qualitative, maybe it doesn't make some sense. Maybe there are some pros and cons to every money move. So if it makes sense to convert, that Roth conversion window is when I would really look at getting aggressive. So here's an example. Let's say right now you're in that Roth conversion window, and maybe you're in the 10 or even 12% marginal tax bracket. Okay. But then you project out, and in 10 years, that tax bracket's going to push up, because when you turn RMD age, so let's say it's 75, that's all of a sudden going to push you up into the 24% bracket. So you're sitting in 12 or 10, and all of a sudden your tax bracket's going to double or even more than double. Maybe it does make sense if conversions make sense for you in your long-term plan. And I say that again, if it does make sense, why not fill up that 12% bracket? Why not even fill up that 22% bracket? Okay. To get ahead of that, because you're going to be paying those dollars at a lower tax bracket today than you will in the future. And you can get those funds out of there. What that's going to do to your tax deferred balance is going to shrink the tax deferred balance. And when you shrink the tax deferred balance, it also shrinks those future RMDs down the road. So maybe you can actually get ahead of it and you don't fall under the RMD tax trap. Maybe you can smoothen, I don't know the right word, it's smoothen your lifetime tax bracket to be 12% indefinitely, because you have 20 years to tackle this. You could just every year, maybe you're taking a little bit of distributions for yourself for income. Of course, you got to eat, you got to enjoy your retirement. That's what I'm saying, qualitative and quantitative. Okay. Well, what good is your retirement if all you're doing is just converting your assets to Roth tax free for what? I mean, what's the purpose of that? Okay. If there's a good purpose, if there's a compelling reason why, great. The Roth conversion makes sense. But if you're scraping by because all of a sudden you're paying all these taxes in order to convert all of your assets to Roth, I don't really find that to be an enjoyable retirement. That's just me personally. But maybe you have the ability to basically smoothen the ride to where you're sitting at 12% indefinitely in retirement, instead of ever getting pushed up to the 22 or 24% bracket. Or maybe you get ahead of it and you chip away, and now instead of being pushed into the 24, maybe you're pushed into the 22, or maybe only some of your income is pushed into the 22. Just because you hit that 22 bracket doesn't mean all of your income is going to be taxed at 22, if that makes sense. It's a gradual tax system. All right. But that Roth conversion window is where I would start. And the way you come up with that is looking at your lifetime tax brackets and seeing if there are any opportunities where your tax bracket drops. That's the Roth conversion window. But you have to model the trade-offs of paying more in taxes today. I think this is the problem with this. Okay. So if you have, in this situation, all of your money in pre-tax accounts, do you have money to pay the taxes now? Because you have taxes due. When you convert to Roth, you're going to pay taxes now. So instead of those assets growing tax deferred, it becomes a taxable event today. And yes, then the money gets into the Roth and then it grows tax free. So yes, there are benefits of tax free growth, but do you have the funds on the side to pay the taxes? Okay. Now, if you don't, it's not the end of the world. We've had clients do this where they actually pay some of the taxes out of their IRA. So let's say they had 100,000 that they wanted to convert, just as an example, but they have no funds to pay the tax. And maybe their effective tax rate is, let's say it's 20%. Well, they're going to owe 20,000 in taxes on that. So what they would do is they would actually move 80 into the Roth and then 20 they would send directly to the IRS. So now you only have 80,000 invested versus 100,000. So 80,000 in the tax-free bucket versus 100,000 in the tax-deferred bucket. Which would you rather have? I mean, it depends on what tax brackets do over your lifetime, right? But more importantly, it depends on another factor, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So you need to really look at this. And so some people call it a break-even point. I don't necessarily disagree with this concept where it's like, how long does it take for your tax-free portfolio to recover those lost assets that you otherwise would have had by paying those taxes over the duration of your lifetime. Okay. So you could look at that. And it's very similar to like a Social Security break-even type of concept, get the money later at a higher amount or take the money now at a lower amount. When is that break-even? When is that crossover point? Kind of a similar concept there. But those taxes may not just be in the form of income taxes. It could also be additional taxes on Social Security, like we mentioned earlier, the IRMA surcharges, the net interest income, or even perhaps higher capital gains taxes when you're doing those conversions, okay? But on the flip side, like we already talked about, the RMD tax trap, it's going to happen anyways, potentially. So you need to look at that and see how penal is that RMD tax trap to you. If it's not triggering IRMA, if it's not triggering, net interest income taxes, maybe it's not super compelling to go super aggressive, pay a bunch of IRMA taxes today in order to get a bunch of money into the Roth. Okay. And that also depends on how long of a window you have. If your window is 2 years, you're probably not going to do a lot of damage in 2 years converting a bunch of assets to Roth. But if your window is 10 or 12 years even, I mean, you can definitely chip away and not really crush yourself in taxes early on and spread out that tax liability for those 10 or 12 years. But I would really say that tax trap of RMDs really surprised people. And we've run hundreds of scenarios before in terms of Roth conversion or no Roth conversions. And sometimes, absolutely, we want to get ahead of it. We want to convert a bunch of money to Roth to avoid that RMD tax trap. On the flip side, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Okay. And so it's no one size fits all on the Roth conversion decision. And we also find, even if the strategy makes sense on paper early on, every year we're having these conversations with our clients. We're having these conversations right now with our existing clients in our firm. We're running the tax projections, see if Roth conversions make sense. For the ones that on paper, it made sense, we bring that conversation up and we say, this is what we talked about. We talked about converting X. Here's how much tax you would have due. And then we have that conversation every year. And I'm telling you, qualitatively, sometimes that is a sticking point where it's like, oh man, I have to pay an additional $12,000 or $15,000 in taxes to do this every single year. Sometimes that's a little painful, even though the long-term math may make sense. That's why I said quantitative and qualitative. But what I would say is this. I would say the biggest needle mover in terms of Roth conversions versus no Roth conversions are really thinking about your legacy goals. Okay. So who are you planning for? And I'm asking you, the one who put this comment in, and everyone in general, if you're in that situation where you have these large and most of your assets, if not all of your assets, are tax deferred, who are you planning for? Is it you? Is it you and your spouse? Is it you, your spouse, and potentially children? Charitable goals? Okay. Because here's the thing. Secure Act 1.0 that passed in 2019 changed the way these tax deferred assets are inherited. So back in the day, before 2019 or 2019 and before, children could inherit these retirement accounts. And instead of taking the RMD based on mom or dad's life expectancy, okay, let's say mom or dad was 90, child is 60, mom or dad, they're taking out high RMDs because their life expectancy is shortened. Okay, that's the formula. So each year you get older, the RMD as a percentage of your portfolio actually goes up. So are your kids in high tax brackets? Because Secure Act 1.0 changed the way inherited IRAs are passed on. No inherited IRA or no stretch IRA anymore. Son or daughter, little Johnny, who's 60 now, right? He's on the brink of retirement. What is going to happen is he's going to have to drain those accounts within 10 years. So instead of potentially a 30-year horizon, it's shortened to now 10 years. So that could trigger significant taxes for little Johnny. Okay. So are you planning for kids? Do you want to leave a legacy? And if so, are your adult children, what's their tax bracket look like? You may not have your child's tax return, but you may have a good idea. Like if your son or daughter is a neurosurgeon, you probably know they're in a pretty high tax bracket. If I leave them a $3 million IRA, that is going to really trigger some significant taxes on that inheritance. Okay. That's what's going on with the Secure Act 1.0 is they are trying to accelerate, our government, are trying to accelerate taxes that otherwise baby boomers could have left these assets to their children and let them spread out those tax liabilities for 30, 40 years. They realize that's a little bit of a loophole. We want to get our tax payment now because our government's in trouble. They're in a lot of debt, by the way, if you have not heard. So they're going to do anything they can to essentially trigger additional taxes without simply increasing the tax bracket. That's why they did Roth conversions, by the way. Before I think it was 2010 or 2012, this rule came about of Roth conversions without any modified adjusted gross income limit. Before then, you had to be under a certain limit to not only contribute, but also convert to Roth. So now it's like, it doesn't matter what your income is. You can convert as much as you want to Roth because, by the way, they're collecting tax revenue that they desperately need today. Okay. So you got to look, why did they do this? Why did they create this legislation? Was it to benefit wealthy people? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. But are your kids in high tax brackets? If so, maybe Roth conversions make some sense because if, let's say Johnny, the neurosurgeon who's 60, he's got a significant portfolio himself and he's on the brink of retirement. He's getting ready to ride off into the sunset and retire. And all of a sudden he inherits his $3 million IRA. You might be thinking, boo hoo. Well, guess what? He's got his employment income. Now he has this inherited IRA income that he's going to have to drain down. Simple math. He might have to pull out $320,000 a year out of that account to fully drain it after 10 years. So add 320 to all the other income sources that they may have. You might be talking 37% tax bracket plus state income taxes, etc. So that's what I'm talking about. If you have the opportunity to convert at 12 or 22 and your beneficiaries are going to otherwise pay 37 plus, that's what I'm talking about with the Roth conversion opportunity. It's not just about your lifetime. Yes, there absolutely could be some benefits there. Reducing your lifetime tax bill, reducing the impact of IRMA, but that could be insignificant compared to the inheritance tax that your children might pay. What about charitable goals? Okay, the second thing I want to throw out here. Do you have charitable goals? Maybe you don't have any adult children that you want to leave funds to, or maybe you have some beneficiaries, but maybe that's part of your assets, but your other part of your assets you may want to leave to charity. Well, guess what? What is the point of leaving a charity a Roth account? They're not paying taxes anyways. So why are you going to leave them a Roth account that you aggressively converted over to Roth to pay to sort of, kind of stick it to the man by not paying taxes? You did pay the taxes on the Roth, and all of a sudden the charity inherits the Roth. They don't care. They could inherit stocks. They can inherit traditional IRAs. They can inherit Roth accounts. It doesn't matter. They are not going to pay any taxes. So if you have charitable goals as part of your legacy strategy, you probably don't want to convert all of your assets to Roth. Maybe you want to do partial conversions and move some of those assets over to Roth to minimize or limit the impact of those RMD tax traps. But when RMDs kick in, if you're charitably inclined, one of my favorite strategies also comes into play. QCDs, qualified charitable distributions. Donate directly to those favorite charities from your IRA. That's going to count dollar for dollar against your RMD, right? So let's say you normally give 30 grand a year to your favorite charities. And let's say your RMD is 100. Well, and let's say you didn't need all 100. Well, you take 30 off the top, give it directly to charity. Now you're only going to be taxed on 70. That's how the QCD works. It doesn't matter if you're itemizing, taking the standard deduction. It does not matter. You can donate as long as you're over 70 and a half. You can donate directly to your favorite charities without paying taxes from your IRA. And even an inherited IRA, by the way. This is one of these nuanced things where if you have an inherited IRA that you're taking RMDs from, you're not yet 73 or 75. So you're not taking RMDs out of your own IRA, but that inherited IRA you can actually donate from that inherited IRA as long as you are over the age of 70 and a half. So kind of a nuanced little planning strategy. So my point is the RMD tax trap becomes a little bit less of a burden if you're charitably inclined during life and at death, because you can tackle some of the RMD tax trap via the QCD strategy. And then from a legacy perspective, the charity is happy to receive your tax deferred IRA because they're not going to pay taxes on that anyways. Third thing I'll throw in there, last but not least, I think this is my last point in this one. Long-term care funding. If your plan, long-term care funding, I mean, this is one of those things. And actually, I'm going to dedicate the next episode. I'm going to dedicate a little chat about long-term care funding because one of the listeners put a great question in the comment section about long-term care self-funding. But it's not a simple answer in terms of do you buy insurance or do you self-fund? And if you self-fund, how much should you allocate? And what account should you designate for that self-funding? And if you buy insurance, how much insurance do you buy? It's definitely not a simple answer. And I'm not going to do it justice just kind of spitting off numbers on a soundbite in a podcast. But what I'd say is if the plan is to self-fund long-term care, it's kind of nice to have some of those assets be self-funded from your traditional IRA. Let me explain why I say that. Typically speaking, we know distributions from the IRAs and 401ks are going to be taxable as ordinary income. But if you need long-term care later on in life, you're probably spending a fair amount of money on your care, unless your spouse is your caregiver. And if so, shame on you. You need to protect your spouse from being your own caregiver. Okay. So if you need income to pay for care, you're hiring a professional, whether it's at home or in a facility, that's to each their own on that front. But distributions are going to be medical expenses if it's going to be paying for long-term care costs. And at least right now, 2025, we're talking about this. If your medical costs exceed 7.5% of your adjusted gross income, you can count those as itemized deductions. So if you're spending $100,000 on long-term care, and you could potentially deduct $50,000 of that as an itemized tax deduction, and it also unlocks other itemized deductions that you might have, like SALT, etc. Maybe some of that IRA distribution is not going to be taxable because you're getting that tax deduction for those medical costs. So actually, long-term care funding potentially could be a great solution with those excess IRA RMDs down the road. So if you're kind of going to this mindset of like, I'm going to self-fund my long-term care costs, I'm going to hire help, and I'm going to self-fund, I'm not going to buy insurance, I don't like insurance, I'm anti-insurance, whatever your reasons might be, distributions from IRAs, not a bad call. But I think, from a math perspective, I think, the math long-term, like I said, just in summary, look at those lifetime tax brackets, see where those gaps are, see where those Roth conversion windows are, but not only consider your own situation, but your spouse and also your children. Okay. And I think this is, and then beneficiaries and charitable goals and long-term care. I think there's so many things that kind of play into this Roth conversion decision. And, but hopefully that helps you. Hopefully that helps you as you are thinking through the complexities of, do you convert or do you not convert? And if so, when do you convert? All right. Moving on to number 2. All right. Here's the next question. I worry that after a lifetime of saving, will I be able to draw down my retirement savings? It's funny because you might be, I think PFR Nation, you all hearing this, you're like, oh, that's absolutely me. This is exactly my mindset. I've been saving my entire career. I've worked hard to build up a certain nest egg. Now I feel financially independent. But now it's like you get to retirement, like, ooh, I'm a little afraid to do this. I'm kind of scared to take that first step. You're not alone. Like people in our circle, the clients that we serve in our firm and our listeners and subscribers to our YouTube channel have, a lot of you have the same mentality. Now, some, would disagree. Kevin, I'm completely fine. I am happy with just spending it down as quickly as possible. But I would say that's actually probably the minority. I think the majority of folks still feel this fear of spending down their nest egg because, like I said, they've been working hard at building this up for the last 30 plus years. Okay. So transitioning from saver to spender is a legitimate concern. So I think I would just start there is that you're not alone, my friend. This is one of those things that's a major behavioral finance challenge for retirees. So the natural reaction from my experience and just seeing clients retired, like I've observed clients actually through retirement now for over 13 years, like seeing clients through the retirement process, I would say 13 years. So what I find is the natural situation is to underspend significantly early on in retirement. And if you think about it, you think about the 3 phases of retirement, right? Your go-go years, honeymoon phase, physically, mentally able to do the things you always wanted to do. Go-go years. You don't know how long that's going to last. I mean, that could last for some, if they're lucky, if they're blessed, 10, 15 plus years. Others, you never know, could be gone before it even starts. I always think about this lady I used to work with. She was a professor at a university, wanted to retire at 65. She wanted to wait till retired at 65. She had the money to retire before 65, but she wanted to get to 65 because she wanted to be Medicare eligible, even though she could buy insurance individually. Like she could have gone out and she could have easily afford to pay for private insurance on her own. She didn't want to do that. She wanted to wait until she got a Medicare because she'd been paying into the system for all of her career. This is one of those behavioral finance things that I try to coach our clients out of because you don't know how healthy you're going to be at 65. And that's exactly what happened. She passed away from a heart attack before she even got to retirement. And, I don't have a crystal ball. You don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how long your go-go years are going to last. So the natural reaction for folks that have this mindset is to underspend significantly during their go-go years. And once the go-go years are done, you don't have time on your side anymore. Perhaps your health is declining. Perhaps you lost a spouse, or maybe your friends are passing away, or family members are passing away. And so you kind of think like you pass your go-go years, your health is declining. You're now in the slow go phase or even the no-go phase. And now you finally realize, oh, actually, you know what? My nest egg has not only stayed the same, but it's actually accumulated significantly more. Maybe you started with a 3 or 4% rate of withdrawal to be on the safe side. But now we've already back tested this on the YouTube, by the way. Spoiler alert. The safe rate of withdrawal of 4% over the last 30 years has done very well. The initial retiree that started with $1 million, they've multiplied their nest egg several times over the last 30 years, starting with a 4% rate of withdrawal. This is very common. Okay. The 4% rule was really meant for that worst case scenario, that October of 1968. And if you retire into that, okay, maybe you need to make some cuts. Maybe you need to make some adjustments. But what I find is that now they're kind of asking themselves, like, who is going to enjoy all of the funds that I've worked hard to accumulate for the rest of my life? And you're kind of thinking about, man, I should have done more earlier. And this is so common. And this is why we are so hardcore in our practice about making sure our clients kind of map out those phases, the go, slow go, and no go. And we give them that permission. So obviously I'm biased on this one. So I guess what I would say is I acknowledge that I'm a bias. But if you are in this situation where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to give myself permission to spend, this is one of the top reasons our clients hire us, is because we can give them permission to spend. I was actually reading a quote from one of our new clients that we just brought on, and I was reading, because we write down some like good sound bites, like things are like, oh, this is important to them. We're going to write this down, put that in their outline. And one of the quotes, you know what? Let me pull it up. I don't want to botch this one. Here it is. I'd love to tell her yes, but sometimes I don't know if I can. Okay. So this is related to his spouse. So this individual that said that, he is the CFO of the household. Spouse, we'll call her the CEO. She's more the visionary. This is what we want to do with the house. This is where we want to be. This is where we want to go. He's more of the CFO, and he just didn't know if he could give her that permission. He wants to say yes, but he just doesn't know if he can. Like, he's worried. Like, he's in that situation where they're very financially secure. They're on the brink of very early retirement. So what I'd say is, if you're in that mindset, that's one of the biggest reasons our clients hire us. And maybe you need to find someone that can give you that permission to spend, can run the numbers with you, and really kind of address, like, what is the concern? Where is that coming from? I'm not like a psychologist or anything, but like, I think from a retirement perspective, I've seen these movies before. So if you can work with someone who's a retirement expert and who can also connect with you specifically and get to know you and your concerns and what's important to you, I believe strongly that you can get some permission to spend and enjoy your retirement nest egg. And maybe you're married and maybe one of you feels that way and the other person feels the complete opposite. That's another reason I think hiring somebody could add value. All right. But with all that being said, here are some specific things you can do to help alleviate this fear of spending. All right. So at its core, the easy answer is run the numbers, right? But what I would say is this: run your numbers with super conservative assumptions. Build in extreme longevity. Like, think about who, mom or dad or grandparents, like how long, like who was the person that lived the longest? Use that longevity plus another 5 years, right? Use higher than expected inflation. Inflation historically has been 2, maybe use 3. We use 3 right now. We're using 3 in our financial planning models just because of that reason, because we just know our clients are concerned about inflation long term. Because of that, we've built in higher than average inflation so we can get ahead of that. And we can already say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we've done high inflation for you. We're assuming 3 versus 2. Plan still looks good. Or you know what? The plan looks tight. Let's actually go back to a reasonable inflation rate of 2 or 2.5. Look how much better your plan works. Inflation's a big one. Maybe build in lower than expected returns. The last 15, 20 years, like I mentioned, the last 30 years, a 4% rule crushed it. An average, listen to this. A safe rate of withdrawal 30 years ago is 7.4%. So an individual 30 years ago could have started with 7.4% and they have not run out of money in 30 years. I'm not saying start with a 7.4% rate of withdrawal and increase it with inflation every year. That's not how retirement typically works. You have Social Security kicking in and, you don't have to give yourself that same inflation raise every single year. But the reason that's happened is because we've had very nice returns over the last 30 years, despite the lost decade. So maybe build in lower than expected rate of returns. Take that average return and cut it by 15 or 20%. Okay. Run your plan through some bear markets early on. All right. Run the scenario. Maybe you're concerned about Social Security. Run some Social Security cuts. Hey, maybe you do cut it by 20%. Maybe in 2034, the expectation is the Social Security trust fund goes away. Cut it by 20%. Because that's right now on paper what is going to happen unless something is going to be addressed. I'm in the camp. I'm going to take on my crystal ball. Something will be addressed at the 11th hour. I don't know what that's going to be. If they're going to make it means based, or if they're going to increase payroll taxes or increase the wage base on Social Security. I think there's so many levers that they can potentially pull. They don't make it look like they're increasing taxes, but they are. But run a 20% haircut on Social Security. And then I think most importantly, run a long-term care event. I think this is one of the biggest reasons why people are afraid to spend, and they don't, because they're protecting against the what if scenario. The what if scenario is, what if they need significant care at the end of their life? Alzheimer's, dementia, physical care. And what if that lasts 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or even longer, right? I mean, that could drain $1 million nest egg pretty quickly. So anyone who's looking to self-fund, if you went through that type of scenario, that's probably going to impact your retirement or potentially your financial independence, or potentially your spouse's, or potentially impact your legacy. So I think using a financial planning tool to run these stress tests is the best way to go about it. Like I mentioned earlier, the Bolden, that's great for DIYers. Hire an advisor that can give you that permission. I think that's one of those things. This is why it's so important to have an objective third party, because you're not objective with your own money. Okay. But once you've run the numbers until you're blue in the face and you see your spending capacity. Okay. So I'm going to go into the assumption this individual has sufficient assets to spend a certain level. And once they see that spending capacity, you really have 2 primary options. Create a retirement paycheck from your investments yourself, like systematic withdrawals from IRAs, 401ks, brokerages, HSAs, Roth accounts, etc., or set up an annuity from an insurance company. Take your assets, give it to the insurance company, and they'll give you a paycheck for the rest of your life. All right. And this is kind of why I kind of like that option. Truthfully, I don't even sell annuities, but I kind of like that option for these individuals, at least for part of their assets, not all, but at least part of their assets, because it's kind of like Social Security. It's going to come in every month, whether you're taking that or not. It's irrevocable. So you can't go to the insurance company. Oh, it stopped sending me money. They're going to send you money as long as you're alive. It's systematic, it's guaranteed, and it's very likely to force you to spend way more than you otherwise would have taken out. I mentioned the 4% rule, and I mentioned the actual safe withdrawal rate has been 7.4% over the last 30 years. I don't know a single person I've ever met who's kind of a DIYer or even a person that is working with an advisor, truthfully, where that advisor recommended they start with a 7.4% rate of withdrawal. In our practice, we've seen it. I mean, because we know that there are stages of retirement. There are the bridge period. That's pre-Social Security kicks in. So maybe someone starts with 7.4, and then when Social Security kicks in, then they back it down. So, but an individual 30 years ago could have started with a 7.4% rate of withdrawal and increased that with inflation every year for the last 30 years and did not run out of money. I don't know a lot of people that are going to do that personally on their own. That's the benefit of an annuity, because you can exchange that, give it to them. They're probably going to give you about 7 to 7.4. I mean, that's probably about what they're going to give you in the form of a payout rate. Okay. And I'm not saying I'm not making this like a pro annuity, pitch, but I think for folks that don't have a process and kind of have that fear of spending down a nest egg that's kind of variable, going up and down with the market, maybe it does make sense for you to cover some of your income gap with annuity income in addition to Social Security or a pension if you have one as well. All right. Now, with all that said, even if you are taking out the money, okay, that's one thing. You still have to spend it. And so even if you're creating that retirement paycheck and you're creating that annuity income or a combination of those two, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could also be a combination. Let's say you're taking that money out. You still have to spend it. And if you're finding that you have what you need, you don't desire for anything else, you don't need anything. Maybe you're a simple person. Okay, that's okay. I'm not saying go live a lavish lifestyle just because you have that capacity. But now you're a perfect candidate for doing things like lifetime giving. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's friends. Maybe it's your favorite charity. Or maybe you're a perfect candidate for leaving a substantial financial legacy, a multiple generational legacy. Okay. But what I'd say is you might as well think about that now at the beginning of retirement so you can pull the right levers to set yourself up for success and actually being a good steward of those funds in terms of, doing something with your wealth if you're in that situation as opposed to just being reactive. Okay. And if you're struggling with that, I would say hire a life coach, or a financial therapist for some inspiration. Or Roberto, what he would like to tell you is go read the book, Die with Zero. All right. So, I would say you don't have to guess on this one. Stress test your plan, use the numbers first, but then you need to give yourself that permission to spend. Okay. And whether that's hiring an advisor, or it's talking to someone, doing something that's going to kind of remove some emotion from the process would be my recommendation. But even if you're finding yourself, I've got this capacity to spend X, but I only need a fraction of that. Then you could start thinking about some of these other things, some of these other wish list items that you may have never even thought you had capacity to do. This is what I find a lot of folks that we work with. They started with nothing. Now they have multiple millions of dollars to spend in retirement. They're not going to spend that even if I tried to force them. And they never think of themselves as wealthy or having a ton of money to give to charity or do all these things where they have actually the capacity to do that. And once you can coach them in the fact that, hey, you have the capacity to do some of these things and make a significant impact, then they get excited. Then that gets them out of bed in the morning. So hope that helps. All right, let's move on to number 3, questionnaire, Q&A. We're going to wrap this one up. All right, this one, my wife is 9.5 years younger than me. I want to retire in a few years at 55. And I'm not sure how long that she'll keep working, but with that age gap, it's a long retirement timeline. How do you best plan for that? Great question. Age gaps we see very common, the men typically don't live as long as the women. So when there's an age gap as well, especially when the female is younger than the male, it could be even more of a gap. You think about, okay, yes, you have this age gap plus additional life expectancy for the female. This is a big concern for people. And, I think it first comes down to longevity expectations. Do you and your spouse have longevity in your gene pool? Okay. How is your health currently? Right. 55 is a fairly aggressive retirement date. Absolutely. It can definitely be done with thoughtful planning. Okay. And obviously the right financial resources, but your spouse at that point, I think will be 45, maybe turning 46. So if longevity is on her side, her life expectancy might even be 50 years. Think about it. Like someone lived until 95. My wife's grandmother, I always talk about Nell, she lived until 98. I don't know if she expected to do that, but she did it. I always ask her, I'm like, hey, Nell, what was your secret? Her answer, she's a country gal from North Carolina. Her answer was Jack Daniels. So I think it was in her gene. I think longevity was just in her gene pool. But, if longevity is on your spouse's side, we're looking at a potentially 50-year time horizon. There is absolutely reason to be concerned with that. So even if you've saved enough, it still might be a concern. You can crunch all the numbers. There's just the longer the time horizon, the more opportunity for things to go wrong and the more potential there is for you to potentially need to pivot at some point, whether it's cutting spending or going back to work or adjusting your plan, etc. But the first thing I would say is, don't even think about getting more conservative, especially with the accounts that you're not going to be looking to tap into for the next 20 to 40 years. So like if you think about your retirement pool, you probably have different buckets of funds. You've got your taxable accounts, your tax deferred accounts, and your tax free accounts. Your taxable accounts, that's typically where folks would go to first, and that's, we definitely subscribe to that too. It's like, if you've got a joint brokerage account or an individual brokerage account and, maybe you've got, some cash in a money market or high yield savings, like that money you've already paid taxes on, just take the funds out, use that money to spend. It's already liquid. It's already at your disposal. Okay. So maybe that account's a little bit more defensive, a little bit more conservative, or that bucket is a little bit more conservative. But maybe then your IRAs, your 401ks, we already know your RMD is not going to begin until 75. So if you retired at 55, your spouse is 45, you have an RMD, that Roth conversion window, we'll call it in this scenario, but you have a 20-year runway until you turn 75 and you're forced to take in minimum distributions. Your spouse, it would be 30 years. So maybe that account's a little bit more aggressive. Like maybe that's all in stocks, truthfully, because that's a 20 to 30 year time horizon. Maybe that's all in stocks. And then maybe the Roth account, additionally, that's all in stocks and maybe a little bit spice on it as well. Maybe some additional asset classes that you would splash into there. Maybe it's your Bitcoin ETF, or maybe it's technology or aggressive growth stocks, whatever that might be for you in terms of your risk tolerance, your risk preference. But those Roth accounts, maybe that's pedal to the metal, aggressive growth. So you kind of think about this, like if you added all of your accounts together and created an asset allocation, maybe it looks like you're 80-20, 80% stocks, 20% bonds, which technically speaking, that is an aggressive investor. But your brokerage account, the one you're tapping into for the next 10, 15 years, that's a little more conservative. So that could give you that peace of mind, knowing that even if you went through a downturn, you're in a good position. And then once you get closer to that RMD age, maybe you start to dial back risk as the closer you get to actually tapping into those tax deferred buckets. And then the Roth accounts, maybe that's an account that you use as legacy. And maybe you never dial back the risk in that account. But I don't know your situation. But I think for you, the first thing I would say is don't fall into the trap of getting too conservative too early, even though you're retired, because you're potentially investing for a 50-year time horizon. And you may want to push up to that upper limit of 75 or even higher percentage in equities instead of kind of your traditional 60-40 portfolio. That would be certainly number one, but you make sure you have that risk tolerance and you have that risk capacity and you have that process for which accounts are you tapping into and how does that impact your investment strategy in that particular bucket. The next thing I'll throw out there is really thinking about maximizing guaranteed life income. Obviously you're still going to be years away from Social Security, but it might be very tempting when you're 55 to say, hey, you know what? In 7 years, I'm going to take Social Security at 62. It might be very tempting to do that. But if you're retiring that early, I don't know how much you've contributed to Social Security over the course of your career. Like maybe you've been a high earner for quite a while, but your spouse potentially might need a strong survivor benefit. Like if you were to predecease her, in this case, your spouse is going to step up to whoever's benefit is higher. And if she's retired in her 40s, you retired in your 50s, it's very likely your benefit would have been higher. So your benefit, we may want to try to max that out as much as possible. Delay that benefit from 62, maybe get closer to full retirement age, or even better yet, wait until 70. But that's still a 15-year then bridge period where you would need to bridge pre-Social Security up until claiming Social Security. Okay. But I would say maximizing that Social Security survivor benefit is huge. Same thing with pensions. Like if you've got a pension or if you have that pension option within your retirement account, maximizing those, that additional guaranteed income, critical for someone who potentially has that longevity in the plan. And then another thing I'll throw out there is have a long-term care plan. I mean, this is for everybody, but certainly for this individual, this couple, is having a long-term care plan because you're planning for a 50-year time horizon, which I'm not saying is impossible. It could be doable. But what if you had a long-term care event and in your 80s, your spouse is going to be in her 70s? How would that blow up the plan? If you drain your assets because of a long-term care need for you, your spouse may live another 20 years. Does she have the capacity to maintain her financial independence 20 years beyond that? Or would it force her into being caregiver in order to preserve that nest egg and ultimately draining her health as well? So if that's a concern, you might benefit from buying some long-term care insurance. Okay. And this is coming from someone, I don't sell long-term care insurance. I'm not pro or anti, but I'm saying in this scenario, the long-term care insurance pool could give your spouse a pool of money that is dedicated for care. So if you ever needed it down the road, she's going to take a claim. I guarantee you, if she has the long-term care insurance and you need care, she's going to file a claim. If she's self-funding, she might think about it for a year or two. She might say, ooh, $100,000 a year. Maybe I'll just do it myself for a while and see how that, trust me, physical, mental health decline. When you become a caregiver for a spouse or a loved one, it is taxing. And for all of you who have done caregiving, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So you may be a great candidate to buy long-term care insurance to protect against if you needed care, your spouse is not forced into being caregiver, and that could preserve the nest egg as well for her longevity for the next 20 years. Also, speaking of long-term care, you might even be a great candidate for some permanent life insurance. In addition to this, this is actually a solution, a product that fits both of these goals. Number one, it provides a long-term care benefit. So when I say permanent life insurance with a long-term care rider, I actually don't even know if I mentioned that. So you might be a good candidate to buy permanent life insurance with a long-term care rider. So this would provide a long-term care benefit if you needed it. But if you didn't, there's also a death benefit that would be paid out to your spouse to essentially help offset some of that longevity risk. So if you passed away at, let's say, maybe you made it until 90, well, she's still going to be, 79 and a half. Okay. So she might still have another 15 years to live. So that insurance could potentially provide a little buffer or cushion to pad the end of her retirement plan. Okay. Again, don't know your situation. Don't know if you're pro or anti life insurance, but that life insurance long-term care rider type of policy could actually be a very viable solution for you to look at to protect against both of those risks, longevity and long-term care. Final thing I'll say there, truthfully, I might look at some part-time gigs, doing something part-time because 45, 55, I don't know about you. Like, I'm not in a situation, I'm not in that situation where I'm like, I need to get out of this job. Like, I need to quit and truthfully, that's a great place to be. Like, as an entrepreneur and doing something that I love, helping people plan for and execute a successful retirement, I love it. I truly enjoy it. I don't see myself in that situation. I'm like, I need to get out as quickly as possible. Maybe you're in a situation where you don't like your gig, but maybe there's something else you could see yourself doing, and that something else could provide a little bit of extra income. That could absolutely help bridge that gap, especially that gap until Social Security if you're going to delay it until 70. So you're not just putting as much pressure on your portfolio early on. Yeah, I'm not telling you, hey, retire, then go work. I'm not saying that. Like, if you don't want to do anything and you're totally at peace, just like traveling all over the place and just doing what you want to do when you want to do it, to each their own. I think for me, I'd be like, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing? Like, let's use my gifts that I've been blessed with to make an impact on my family, on my community, to the people we're serving, etc. Maybe you need to ask that question for yourself. What are those gifts that you have, and how can you use those gifts to make a better life for the ones around you in your circle? And if you can earn a little extra income from doing so, even better. All right, well, that's it for this little Q&A session, everybody. I hope you guys found it helpful. And listen, if you have questions you want me to discuss in another Q&A episode, drop them in the comments right in Spotify or the Spotify podcast or in the YouTube comments. I read all of them, and I keep a little spreadsheet. I save all these questions, and I'm like, this is one I'm going to come back to. But we're going to do more of those YouTube comments and questions next podcast episode. So you're not going to want to miss that one for episode 99. If you don't want to drop it in the comments, you can send me an email directly, kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. And listen, if you're If you're over 50, you've accumulated between $1 million and $5 million for retirement, and you want to fire your boss, enjoy retirement, worry less about money, this is what we do on a day in and out, a day out basis. So if you're feeling like you're on an island or doing this by yourself, or maybe you have an advisor and you're like, I don't really know if they specialize in retirement and I don't feel like it's the right fit for me going forward, visit our website, www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can fill out the retirement readiness questionnaire in the show notes. We'd love to get to know you, see how we can help with your journey to and through retirement. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Until next week, this is Kevin Lau signing off.